Hey, 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 hey. Hey, 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 hey.
When you can share what breaks your heart, no matter what situation you're in, that's what builds the strongest ties with people.
In the morning.
You're listening to The Seed, Conversations for Radical Hope, a Pendle Hill podcast where Quakers and other seekers come together to explore visions of the world that is growing up through the cracks of our broken system. I'm your host, Dwight Dunstan. This season, we're exploring what spiritual alignment means in this moment of escalating social and political upheaval and violence. How do we cultivate discernment to stay the course and stay connected to our leadings? How are we being called to transform ourselves and our communities to break down systems of oppression and embody new ways of being? Our guest today is Rabbi Mordechai Liebling. Rabbi Mordechai is a member of Rabbis for Ceasefire and is the senior advisor for POWER Interfaith, the largest faith-based community organizing group in Pennsylvania. Prior to POWER, he founded and directed the social justice organizing program at the Reconstructionist Rabbinical College and was co-founder of TRUA, the Rabbinic Call for Human Rights. He's also served with Jewish Funds for Justice, now known as Bend the Arc, and the Jewish Reconstructionist Federation. Rabbi Mordechai leads workshops on the Work That Reconnects, a framework developed by Joanna Macy, and also on race, antisemitism, and Christian hegemony. What a honor and a joy to be here today with you, Rabbi Mordechai Liebling. As I just settle into the connection with you, I can just really feel your presence, your voice, your spirit, and I'm so excited for what will unfold in our time together here today. Yeah, I feel a tenderness too, and being in the space with you today. So thank you for joining us here on The Seed.
Thank you for having me. It does feel very special to be here with you right now. So it feels very blessed at this moment that we can do this.
Yes. Rabbi Mordechai, I'm curious, what's it like being you today?
Well, today is not the best day. I happen to be on the executive committee of a board of directors of a national organization that's in the midst of a crisis. So I've been on the phone, emergency meeting this, emergency meeting that the entire week. Mm-hmm. 2 more meetings later today, so it's not been the best of weeks. But, kind of comes with the territory.
Yeah. No, thank you for answering it truthfully, as folks often do. I'm curious how you are pulling on wisdoms from things you've learned in the past to this moment, to support you, to support the communities that you're a part of.
Well, sure, thanks. Just to be transparent, I'm 75 years old and began my life as a organizer, activist during the war in Vietnam. So I was 17 years old when I started. So I've been at this for a long time. Mm-hmm. I certainly remember moments, during when we were fighting the war in Vietnam that, it certainly seemed like we were going to get nowhere. The Nixon administration was pretty awful, and, the cops could be pretty mean. We definitely spent a lot of time out in the streets facing cops who were kind of in full riot gear and were trying to intimidate us as much as they possibly could. For a time in the 1970s, I was the only white person and the only Jewish person in a 10-person collective that was doing anti-racist community organizing work in the neighborhood in Boston during the Boston busing crisis when there was a lot of overt racism. And what I learned is you stay strong by sharing your pain with each other. That there is nothing that builds solidarity more than sharing your pain and sharing your fears with each other. That there's an old Hasidic saying that you don't know somebody until you know what their pain is. You don't know what breaks their heart when you can share what breaks your heart, no matter what situation you're in, that's what builds the strongest ties with people. Joanna Macy, who's, been a very important teacher for me, Joanna has this cycle, which she believes we go through all the time, and I have found that very useful, that we begin with gratitude. We begin with what we are grateful for, grateful to be alive, grateful about the universe, grateful about creation, grateful about the people in our lives. So we have to root ourselves in gratitude. If there is one thing that is in common with every faith tradition in the world, it's the cultivation of gratitude. We might not agree on anything else, but every faith tradition begins with the cultivation of gratitude. So we begin with gratitude, and in that space of our hearts full and open and grateful, we allow the pain to arise, not blame ourselves, and have compassion for ourselves and have compassion for the people around us for that pain. And then if we allow that pain to do its work, we know that physiologically, grief and tears opens our neurological systems, that it's physiological, that when we express our grief, our body chemistry actually changes. Different neural pathways open up. And then we can begin to think anew. Joanna calls it as seeing with new old eyes. We can see different possibilities. And from that place of seeing different possibilities, we begin to make plans. And we talk about going forth. What are the plans that we want to make? What are the resources that we have? Who are our allies? What is it that we have in our toolkit to help us go forth? One of the things about grief is people are afraid of it. The way you can help people with that is by creating a strong container. So whether that container is a worship service or a workshop, the ability for the people who are leading it to create a place where people can feel safe in that moment, that their grief will be contained, that nobody will attack them for it, that there is a holder for that grief, that allows people to express it more. Going through that cycle of gratitude, grief, seeing with new eyes, going forth, and knowing that that's possible helps a lot. A friend of mine, a Jewish thinker named Michael Lerner, whose definition of God is the possibility of possibility.
Part of how I see the role of clergy, maybe in some forms of Quakerism, there's clergy in the same way that there's rabbis or imams or preachers, but I feel like clergy, to some extent, role is to hold down that possibility of a possibility. The
role of a clergy person in organizing is to bring love into the picture. And that what we do is done not out of anger, but out of love. I've been privileged to spend some time with the late Congressman John Lewis, people who taught him like Vincent Harding and other black civil rights leaders who come from a faith tradition. And what I have seen from those folks is that you come from a place of love. That place in our hearts, that's important, that we have to key into. I was at Standing Rock during the work there to stop the Keystone Pipeline. And the elders there, everything we did was in ceremony, was that mindset. I remember one particular day we were doing a ritual outside and the police came down and there was National Guard in full riot gear. There were tanks. It was crazy shit. crazy stuff. It was such a militarization. The elders stayed in ceremony. That was their direction to us. We're here. We are in ceremony. We are not being reactive. We are not being angry. Our hearts are open. We love the land. We're connected to the land. We're connected to each other. We're connected to the divine spirit. That is the way we are acting. Just so happens, Monday and Tuesday, I was in New York City as part of a group of rabbis for ceasefire. We bought tour tickets, and 40 of us, and went inside where the balcony of the Security Council was in session. And we told our tour guide that we wanted a group photo. And the tour guide said, fine, have a group photo. So we assembled to the group photo, and then we prearranged and rehearsed the whole thing. And one of the rabbis took out a shofar and blew the shofar, the ram song. All all of a sudden took out our prayer shawls and put on our prayer shawls and started singing. And we did a prayer service right there in the UN.
Wow. Wow.
But my intention the whole time was I am in ceremony. That was like what I learned from the elders at Standing Rock was that I was going to do this with that intent, that my intent, my focus for that whole time was I am doing this in prayer, in ritual, in ceremony, to be present to what is going on and to know why I'm doing this out of love and concern.
Sounds like ceremony helped you to stay present to that love that you mentioned, to this higher purpose, to the people around you, the people that you were with, right? In both cases, you mentioned being in community, doing ceremony.
Yes.
And that's so, so powerful. Wow. Wow. I'm curious if there's any other stories that come to mind as you think about other moments where maybe you've engaged in a dropping down in an intense moment to that place of love, that keeping yourself pure, connected to a higher purpose, even in the midst of so much swirling.
One moment that comes to mind was a hard moment. I was in Charlottesville in 2017 when the alt-right came to march, and the folks in Charlottesville put out a call for clergy to come down. You know, at one point, we were about 50 clergy lined up in a line, and we had 2 or 3 feet in front of us the neo-Nazis, and 2 or 3 feet behind us were Antifa, and they were yelling at each other, and it was clear that violence was about to break out. And we sort of had to leave that space standing in between them. A little while later is when the car drove down the road and the woman was killed and other people were wounded, and we had to go out there essentially and become street chaplains. We had to go out there, and minister to the folks who were out in the streets, who had witnessed what happened, who were, just terrified, upset. After a while, and it was time to regather the clergy, and they asked me if I would gather folks. We had to recenter in our purpose. We had to recenter in our connection to each other. We had to recenter into our connection to the divine, to remind us that that's where we were coming from, and that's what we were about. In that moment of tragedy, in the face of literally death, and in the face of folks being wounded, we had to make that connection. We had to be able to say, yes, this is who we are. This is why we're here.
There was something about your steadfastness, your groundedness to reconnect the group to their individual values and purpose for showing up, not bypassing the grief that folks were feeling, but inviting that into alongside this other truth.
Yeah.
We are here. We are connected. We have community. The grief and just the awe of that. Yeah, it made me quite emotional in just that sharing. And I thank you for that. We see so much anger on many sides. This rise we see in anti-Semitism and Islamophobia, this hatred, this rage, this anger that we see. There's a history of rage and hate and anger towards these groups. And there's a potential for them to consume us,
A lot of Jewish intergenerational trauma was kicked off by Hamas killing 1,200 civilians and clearly engaging in sexual violence and acts of what are called terrorism. And that kicked off, not surprisingly, a lot of trauma in the Jewish community. And the government of Israel manipulates that trauma, tries to use that trauma to justify its actions, and plays that in the Jewish community. Helping people to understand what a traumatic response is and how people are still acting out of that is an important piece of this, at least on the pastoral level of responding to this. And on a political level of responding to it, it's been important to be out there in public. It's been a very difficult moment in the Jewish community. Advocating for a ceasefire is very much unfortunately, the minority position, it seems, in the Jewish community these days, and certainly among rabbis and Jewish institutions. They have not yet come to a place of understanding that a ceasefire is necessary. So a piece of this, has been learning how to listen to the folks who are still not able to support a ceasefire, and listen. It's about listening to their fear. Each of my parents lost their parents and their siblings during the Holocaust. They were, quote, sole survivors in their large extended families. So I grew up with my parents expressing grief. They missed their families. Their families were killed. And they also expressed joy and gratitude. I didn't have any relatives outside my parents, really. I grew up in a community of Holocaust survivors, my parents' friends, and their kids. Even though they had all lived through absolute devastation and grief and horror, they knew how to party. They celebrated life. They did not allow their experience to rob them of the ability to celebrate what could be celebrated. They would have a good time. They would celebrate. They would party. They would sing. They would have fun. They did it together. They gave each other strength. So I witnessed growing up what community can do to hold people, and that no matter what your experience is, the possibility of celebrating life and what you have is there. No matter what grief. They lost their parents, their sister, their brother. They lived in hiding. They were in the worst conditions. And they could celebrate. They knew that life was precious. One of the things I guess they learned is the preciousness of life. Certainly a lot of survivors ended up being depressed. I saw that as well. Thankfully, my parents, and their friends, they knew that it was important to celebrate each other, support each other, and have fun. That was a way that helped you survive. That was a way to say, we won. They didn't get us. We won. We're alive, and we're going to celebrate. That helped me understand that you could hold grief and joy at the same time. When our hearts are big enough to hold the joy and the grief in that same moment, those are transcendent moments.
I would love to hear more about your work and experience and the learnings over the last few months, specifically working with other rabbis and clergy around a ceasefire in Gaza. Lessons that you've learned both in the organizing space, but also it feels like this powerful spiritual moment in tuning into what God's Spirit, the universe, is calling us to. There's this potential for all of us to be transformed in this time.
In some ways, I am grateful that I have not at all been in the leadership of organizing this Rabbis for Ceasefire, and it's been the next generation of rabbis who have been in the lead. Some of them my former students, so I feel very proud of the rabbinical students and younger rabbis out there who really have taken the lead in this Rabbis for Ceasefire, and they are doing beautiful work. I'm just following their lead. Rabbis for Ceasefire has tried to be very public in our opposition, and in many ways to make it okay for others. By rabbis being public, it allows for lay people who feel isolated in their congregations or isolated where they are because the people in the front of the room are supporting this war, allows them to see that there are people of moral authority, people connected to the tradition who are opposed to this war and fighting for a ceasefire. So we also have a very symbolic role that gives other people the ability/permission to advocate for a ceasefire wherever they are and not feel so isolated. In the last 2 months, in some ways, the most emotional or a moment or challenging moment for me was in Philadelphia. Some Palestinians had a demonstration that was a prayer service outside of Senator Casey's office out in the streets, and there were a few hundred people, and there were a group of 60 or 80 Muslims who held an evening prayer service and memorial service out in public for the people who were killed. And they asked some rabbis to come. Part of the memorial service was they read the names of 100 children who were killed in Gaza. And they asked me to say the Jewish prayer for the dead, the well-known Jewish prayer called Kaddish, which is, part of every service, the prayer, memorial prayer. And they asked me, after the names were read, to say Kaddish. I was in front of a group of Muslims at a prayer service standing next to somebody holding a Palestinian flag. And I was saying Kaddish for children who were murdered by the Israeli army. It was hard. It was hard. That was a learning moment. That was a hard moment. Didn't think I'd ever have to do that.
I just want to breathe in with you, good brother. Just in hearing that story, the emotion and feeling emotional myself, I also felt some of my humanity coming back through this act. Something you never could imagine doing, and hearing that story. Yeah, my brain couldn't conceive of a situation in which a rabbi would be saying Kaddish after the ceremony, the naming of children who were killed by the Israeli army. Just, there's so much about that. And also at the core, there's just something about, once again, about the love that you mentioned, right? If we all really do belong to each other, like our scriptures, our texts say, we are creations of God. We are, brothers and sisters and siblings. I hear something about that experience of you saying Kaddish. I feel you feeling into that truth of we belong to one another.
It goes back to where we started about solidarity.
Yep.
And sharing each other's pain. I mean, I feel like we've gone full circle from where we started to here. It's solidarity, and the way you express solidarity is by sharing your pain with each other and standing with each other in our grief.
Yeah. I'm just so grateful for all of the light and love that you've brought to our time together. I could cry a lot. I probably will once we, for that gratitude and grief, right? Tapping into both of those sources.
That's right.
I truly, from the bottom of my heart, thank you for reconnecting me with, what it means to be alive. I thank you. And I want to close by just asking if there's anything else you'd like to offer listeners or any last words you want to bring to our time together.
Thank you. I think we need to hold on to the vision of beloved community, that vision of beloved community where we can all be together in solidarity, in each other's beauty, each other's strength, as well as our grief is really important. We are entering into certainly the most difficult time in our lifetimes in the American political system. These next 8 or 10 months here till next November, we are going to experience increasing conflict, increasing anxiety, increasing fear, and increasing threat to our democracy. That means that there will be more and more ways in which people try to divide us from each other. What happened with the president of Harvard and Penn and all of these right-wing people all of a sudden becoming defenders of Jews against anti-Semitism is such crass manipulation. So whether it's racism or Islamophobia or anti-Semitism or transphobia, there are going to be a myriad of ways in which people are going to try to divide us. And we have to remember in these next year that we have to stand together and that we have to have compassion for the folks who are our opponents in this. they're coming out of a place of pain for the most part. The rank and file folk who are opposing us, they're coming out of a place of deep pain. I'm not talking about Trump and his cronies who are, out for power and gain, but everybody else, they're coming from a place of deep pain. We have to oppose what they're trying to do, but we need to do it with some sense of compassion without vilifying them. The vilification of the other never leads to anything good. In this next year where we're going to be involved in very intense organizing to protect our democracy, to protect our rights, let's not fall into the trap of villainizing the other. And let's also show true solidarity with each other.
Mm-hmm. A few different names got mentioned in our time together. John Lewis and Vincent Harding and Martin Luther King. And I don't know who has the authority to lift up folks into that echelon of great thinkers and lovers. But I will say today here on The Seed that I'm so glad to be alive at the same time as you, to have your thinking and your love a part of our movements, a part of our quest to remember each other's goodness, humanity, to build solidarity across our differences, all in service of that beloved community. I just want to thank you so much for your commitment to the beloved community. I can't wait to continue to see how you let your life speak.
Thank you, Dwight. This has been very sweet. I really appreciate the depth of your questions, the humanity of your questions, and the way you created a tone for this time together. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hey, 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 hey. Hey, 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 hey. Hey, 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 hey. Hey, 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 hey. Hey, 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 hey. Hey, 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 hey. In the morning.
The Seed is a project of Pendle Hill, a Quaker center open to all for spirit-led learning, retreat, and community. We're located in Wallingford, Pennsylvania, on the traditional territory of the Lenni Lenape people. Many of our guests are teachers, leaders, and speakers at Pendle Hill, and we host retreats, workshops, and lectures all year round. For a full list of these upcoming education opportunities, visit pendlehill.org/learn. This episode was produced and edited by Anna Hill, with consulting from Peterson Toscano. Our theme music is the I Rise Project by Reverend Retta Morgan and Bennett Kuhn, produced by Astronautical Records. You can stay in touch by following us at Pendle Hill Seed on all social media platforms, or by emailing podcast@pendlehill.org. This project was made possible by the generous support of the Thomas H. and Mary Williams Shoemaker Fund. If you're finding these conversations meaningful, you can support our work financially by heading over to pendlehill.org/donate. And please subscribe, rate, and review us wherever you get your podcasts. These seeds could not be planted without you.